The boardroom grew eerily quiet as I clicked to the final slide of my presentation. The new budget numbers glowed starkly on the screen, and I caught Karen's expression shift dramatically, from her usual smug confidence to something close to sheer panic. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into the conference table as she absorbed the shocking $5,000 increase in HOA fees staring right back at her. The room held its breath. Karen's facade cracked, her voice trembling with disbelief as the weight of the numbers sank in. I straightened my tie and savored the moment I had been meticulously planning for weeks. Calmly, I said, "You did this, Karen. The moment you found me $1,000 for swimming in my own lake." Let me rewind and explain how things reached this boiling point. My name is David, and I've lived in Willow Creek Estates for 15 years. When I bought my home, it wasn't the 4-bedroom colonial or the spacious 3-car garage that sealed the deal. It was the pristine, 20-acre lake that came with the deed, Crystal Lake, as the original owners had named it. The lake lay partly on my property and partly along the edge of the HOA community. For over a decade, this arrangement worked seamlessly. Neighbors would wave as I took my morning swims, and every summer, I even allowed the HOA to hold their picnic on my stretch of shoreline. Then Karen became HOA president. You know the type, arrived at her first board meeting armed with a leather-bound notebook, filled with color-coded tabs and a mission to impose order on what she saw as chaos. Within her first month, she sent out 17 warning letters citing infractions as minor as mailboxes being 2 inches too tall or grass half an inch too long. She carried an actual ruler in her purse, measuring everything with an obsessive precision that unsettled everyone. The trouble began on a bright Saturday morning in June. I was floating on my back, watching clouds drift by, when that unmistakable shriek pierced the air. Karen stood at the water's edge, wearing her HOA president blazer despite the scorching 90-degree heat, waving a clipboard like a battle flag. She demanded that I exit the water immediately. Swimming was strictly forbidden in all community bodies of water, she announced, reading from HOA Regulation 7.3.9, which required board approval and insurance documentation for any recreational water activity. I treaded water, baffled. This was my lake, after all. I told her to check the property records. Karen adjusted her oversized sunglasses, the kind that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager," from a mile away, and insisted that the HOA governed all shared natural spaces within the community, including the lake bordering their property. "This is not how property law works," I replied, swimming back toward my dock as she called after me, warning that I was officially on notice. I thought that would be the end of it, that once she reviewed the property lines and deed restrictions, she'd realize her mistake. But I badly underestimated Karen's determination and her uncanny ability to twist reality to fit her narrative. The following Monday, a certified letter arrived on official HOA letterhead. It detailed my blatant violation of community standards and slapped a $1,000 fine on me for unauthorized use of community resources. The letter spanned 3 pages, citing fabricated regulations and threatening legal action if I continued my reckless endangerment of community safety. I tried a reasonable approach first. I gathered copies of my deed, highlighting the sections that clearly proved my ownership of the lake. I included the original 1952 survey, water rights documentation, and even a letter from the previous HOA president acknowledging my private ownership. I hand-delivered everything to Karen's house. She answered the door dressed in yet another blazer, this one pink, as if she had a whole closet dedicated to her HOA authority uniforms. Without even glancing at my documents, she said firmly, "The fine stands. The board has decided." "The board has spoken," Karen said firmly. I pressed for details. When had this mysterious board meeting taken place? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "An emergency session," she replied coolly. "We take safety violations very seriously." Later, I discovered the so-called emergency session was little more than Karen and her 2 closest allies huddling over lattes at Starbucks. Meanwhile, the letters kept arriving, nearly one every day, each more threatening and absurd than the last. Karen filed complaints with the city, accusing me of creating what she called an attractive nuisance. She launched a whisper campaign among neighbors, spinning wild tales about how I was setting a dangerous precedent. Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down even came knocking, wide-eyed, asking if it was true that I was planning to open an unlicensed water park. That was the tipping point. I decided enough was enough, I would stop defending and start attacking. For 2 weeks, I buried myself in mountains of HOA documents, bylaws, contracts, agreements, spanning 3 decades of tangled rules and policies. That's when I struck gold, the smoking gun. An easement agreement from 1998, granting the HOA limited use of a portion of my property for maintenance access to their section of Crystal Lake. The agreement covered the small beach area used for community events and the gravel road their maintenance trucks relied on. Here's the catch: the agreement expired after 25 years unless it was formally renewed. It was now 2024, and nobody had bothered to renew it. I ran everything past my lawyer, who burst out laughing once I laid out the situation. So she's fining you for using your own property while her organization is technically trespassing? This is going to be fun. Armed with this newfound leverage, I waited for the next HOA board meeting to drop my bombshell. These meetings were Karen's pride and joy, run like congressional hearings complete with a gavel sheet ordered on Amazon and strict adherence to Robert's Rules of Order. I signed up for the public comment period and waited. When Karen finally called my name, her tone was dripping with disdain. I stood, leather folder in hand, two could play the official documentation game. "Thank you, Madam President," I began, matching her formal tone. "I'm here to discuss the expiration of the easement agreement between the HOA and my property." The room fell silent. Karen's hand twitched over her gavel. I pulled out copies for each board member and continued. The HOA's legal access to the northern section of Crystal Lake, including the beach and maintenance road, expired 6 months ago. I've tolerated the continued trespassing, but given recent events, I believe it's time to formalize a new arrangement. Karen's face shifted through a spectrum of colors, red, white, and then a shade of purple I didn't know human skin could take on. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "We've used that access for decades without legal authorization." "For the past 6 months, yes," I confirmed. "My attorney has drafted a new lease agreement. The terms are quite reasonable. The HOA can maintain access for an annual fee of," I paused, letting the moment stretch, $5,000. A collective gasp swept through the room. Someone's coffee cup clattered to the floor. Karen shrieked, momentarily forgetting all about her precious Robert's Rules. "That's extortion." "That's market rate for lakefront access," I said calmly. "I had 3 commercial real estate agents provide comps. If anything, I'm giving you a discount. Of course, you're welcome to decline and lose access entirely. I'm sure the community would understand losing their beach and having to drive an extra 4 miles around the lake for maintenance." Board members began whispering frantically. Tom Bradley, the treasurer, was already pulling up budget spreadsheets on his laptop. Karen looked like she was about to have a stroke. "You can't do this," she hissed. "Actually, I can," I said, sliding the lease agreement across the table. "You have 30 days to decide. After that, I'll be installing a gate." The next 3 weeks were glorious chaos. Word spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. The very people who had avoided me after Karen's gossip campaign suddenly developed strong opinions about fiscal responsibility and board overreach. The community Facebook group exploded with calls for emergency budget meetings and demands for accountability. Karen tried everything to regain control, but the tide had turned. Karen unleashed a flurry of cease and desist letters, each likely racking up a hefty legal bill from her attorney, only to be met with the cold truth that none held any legal standing. She tried to lean on historical use rights as her next weapon, but she couldn't produce a shred of documentation to back up her claim. Even when she attempted to drag the city into the fray, they wisely declined to get involved in what was ultimately a private civil property dispute. As the deadline I set approached, just 2 days away, and with a full-scale revolt brewing among residents fed up with Karen's antics, the board finally called an emergency meeting, a real one, not a Starbucks coffee clutch. The community center was packed beyond capacity. People stood shoulder to shoulder in the aisles, and someone had even set up a live stream for residents unable to attend in person. Karen sat at the head table, her usual blazer swapped out for a severe black suit that made her look like she was attending her own funeral, which, in a professional sense, she was. The vote was swift and nearly unanimous, save for one abstention. Karen predictably voted against it, but the numbers were overwhelming, 4-1. The lease agreement was approved, the budget adjusted, and the HOA fees across the board increased to cover the new expense. But the real victory was what came next. The same keyboard warriors who had once cheered Karen on for every petty rule suddenly turned their fury squarely on her. The HOA Facebook group exploded with detailed breakdowns exposing how her personal vendetta had cost every household an extra $160 a year. Someone even created a meme featuring her face superimposed on the Titanic, with the caption, "I'll never let go of my clipboard." At the next board meeting, residents flooded the public comment period. One by one, neighbors stood up to voice their deep disappointment in the board's leadership. Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher who hadn't spoken at a meeting in over a decade, delivered a particularly scathing speech on fiscal responsibility and the dangers of unchecked power. She concluded with a powerful line, "Perhaps some board members should consider whether they're truly serving the community's best interests." That very night, a recall petition began circulating. Within a week, it had gathered more than enough signatures to trigger a special election. Karen scrambled to rally her supporters, but it quickly became clear that hiking everyone's fees over a personal grudge was not an effective campaign strategy. On the morning of the recall vote, I timed my swim perfectly. As I floated on my back, I spotted Karen's car parked at the community center. She had arrived at 6 a.m., setting up a table with cookies and flyers, desperately trying to defend her record. By noon, the cookies sat untouched, and she was standing alone. When the results were announced that evening, Karen was removed from the board by a staggering 87% margin, the highest in HOA history. As the room absorbed the results, Karen stood up clutching her leather notebook like armor. Her voice cracked as she declared, "This is a mistake. I was only trying to maintain standards. You'll regret this when property values plummet." Someone in the back actually laughed. Her face crumbled, and without another word, she grabbed her giant purse and measuring ruler and stormed out. The sharp click of her heels on the linoleum echoed like a countdown to her exile. The new board sent me a formal apology the following week, accompanied by a check refunding my $1,000 fine plus interest. They proposed renegotiating the lease at a far more modest $500 per year, coupled with promises of mutual respect and cooperation going forward. I accepted immediately. To celebrate, I installed a new sign at the entrance to my section of the lake. In large, friendly letters, it read, "Private property, swim free." Below that, in much smaller print, it added, "HOA leadership not welcome." The last I heard, Karen had listed her house for sale. The real estate agent mentioned something about her taking a job 3 counties away, presumably somewhere no one had heard of the Crystal Lake incident. I like to imagine there's an unsuspecting HOA board out there, blissfully unaware of the storm about to hit them. As for me, I still swim every morning. Sometimes, I float on my back and think back to that day in the boardroom when I presented the $5,000 increase. The look on Karen's face was worth every penny of legal fees and research time. She learned the hard way that sometimes the smallest power can corrupt absolutely, and that swimming in your own lake isn't a crime, no matter what her clipboard says.